Welcome to Lola and the Poets, a podcast on the magical reel. Welcome, dear people, to the first episode of Lola and the Poets, a podcast on the magical reel, coming to you this time entirely from the flatlands of Novi Sad, Serbia. This is a show intro in which I will sincerely endeavor to explain what the show is going to be about, considering the very broad container of the magical reel. So let's do it.
Hundreds of thousands of people are going to listen to him over the radio. And unless he says something that's sensational, it's just no good.
I hope to make Lola and the Poets a space that is accessible to all people, but especially people that view the magical as life itself, and our experience of the divine as a call to co-create with the universe, who have an openness to the beauty in the world, but also accept its ugliness, observing synchronicities and differentiating between one's own projections and the visions that are given to us or that we quest for, working with nature in all its forms, honoring our dream states as equally important as our waking hours, nourishing the imaginal, who have respect towards holy words of all sacred texts and stories, finding ones that are resonant to their own soul journeys. What we will be exploring on the show, and with our guests that we will have on, are our own magical journeys, how the mystical and the mundane are intertwined. The topics we'll be discussing are many: philosophies, cosmologies, myths, spiritual practices, and storytelling across the globe, the imaginal realm in shamanic cultures, transcendental states, transpersonal and archetypal psychology, art psychotherapy, creative exploration of the mystical, the use of artistic expression in therapy as a therapeutic tool, anthropology of ritual, cinema as modern magic, personal symbolism and temenos, the sacred space, dreams and dream time, shadow work, body wisdom, animal wisdom, plant healing practices, ancestral lineage healing, archetypal patterns in our lives, paranormal and psychedelic experiences, gifts of prophecy, astrology, tarot, various forms of divination, precognition and psychic awareness, psychogeography, wanderlust, and the holy pilgrimage. So it's going to be all the yummy stuff. Listening to the music of the spheres will most certainly be encouraged, as astrology has been an important part of my life. I've been studying it and practicing it privately for over 30 years. So we'll follow the astrological weather and celestial timing, but as there are a few excellent shows out there that I will be plugging, which will give you a more specialist view, What we will be doing here most of all is tapping into the potential of the moment, or maybe in a more down-to-earth way of saying it, exploring how to take in the world as it is, fully, and loving it for what it is, so it can become what it could be, the world through the eyes of a poet. Now, in order to find enchantment in simple everyday experiences, it's important to listen to your heart and let your mind be open to an unusual perspective, kind of nourishing a talent for the peculiar, which restores in us a state of childlike awe, and that helps clean the daily debris of our mechanical existence. This endless stream of mostly toxic information hitting our cortexes. We will also be discussing the reemergence of the goddess archetype, the feminine aspect of the divine, as a sign of a collective desire for a harmonization between polarities, awakening all our inherent abilities, a deepening of awareness of how environments, thoughts, and emotions influence our actions in these exceptionally turbulent times. My name is Milana. Some people call me Mila. In fact, I seem to be given my nickname before I was given my name, because Mila is in Serbian a word that means beloved, graceful. So I was very lucky with the name, but it's not really easy to live up to. I'm a writer and artist by vocation. My educational and experiential background is in psychology, art psychotherapy, and in cinema. There will be a lot of material in the shows that will relate to my background, especially, of course, psychology. And then there will be shows that would relate directly to cinema, the magic that is cinema. There will be solo shows I plan on expanding of one's own visionary capacities through divinatory forms, as are tarot and lucid dreaming. That would be a special group of shows aimed at developing one's own sense of magic in the world without a need for ritualizing that experience in an occult way. So the best way to define Lola and the Poets podcast in a playful way is to call it a virtual alchemical art workshop for spiritual detectives, where the art material is this vast vault of planetary heritage of storytelling and healing that we have. The artistic process is one of soul investigation, and our artistic production is of a personal magical nature, applied in our lives as a tool for being a better human. When I think of magic, I see it as the opposite of illusion, the ability to see through the veil of illusion, a capacity for the therapeutic numinous. But as everything of value, it can be corrupted, and it often is deeply corrupted, mostly through an addiction to occult power. And that happens more often than we think. Or it can be corrupted through a dubious means, most often, of quick material gain. Essentially, all of this manifests as an unregulated, egoistic, opportunistic use of wisdom that is passed on through generations. A colonizing of thoughts, spiritual frameworks and practices, without the life experience and capacities necessary to absorb them, and thus appropriating the sacred calling that only comes to the few. To be a guide to others is an enormous task, and the fallout from misuse of this sacred duty is often really devastating. But that's something that comes later on. People get in a bit too deep, and then they don't know how to find the exit. This abuse of magical power can also manifest in a more organized occult setting as connection of worldly power and its underworld counterparts. Now, this is a very tricky theme to explore well, and there are a few phenomenal and brave podcasts out there doing just that. So we will only marginally touch on it where it cannot be avoided. And there will be times like that, especially when talking about the collective shadow and the concept of evil. It's not a comfortable thing to talk about, but it is most definitely an important subject to talk about. So, what I would like to convey through my own experience and that of our guests is that we can be magicians and healers of our own lives. And with the spirit of co creation with the divine, we will be able to transform quite a lot of strife that comes our way into pure gold just by having an astute attunement to life, a willingness to face our own darkness and be good and do good. It's also wise to develop a magical awareness, and that's for the purposes of self-protection. This is something I plan to mention often. These would be my very abridged views on magic and the esoteric material of alchemy, both in the psychological metaphorical sense of the word. I will be using more often than in terms of its hermetic roots, but I will use both. And it would be a good idea to explain why I use that phrase, magical real, as the show's philosophy, because of course everyone has their own idea of what magic is. It's a subjective thing. What we assume to be real is often a pretty subjective thing too, and culturally determined. So what one person considers to be magic, another person would call perhaps technology, or science, or mind tricks, or see it as a divine intervention. And then, of course, some see it as a specialized craft, a part of a spiritual heritage, or an occult science, or just as living the life of wonder. And I guess I'm in the living the life group because I never had the impulse to formally ritualize this experience. I was actually very careful with that, but I do not judge when it's done with a sense of inner morality. I believe that magic is just a personal connection to all the currents that surround us. So, in a way, you're already magically active if you're very finely tuned. You work with it, no matter if you want to or not. It's just merely a strong link with one's own unconscious materials and an ability to make them conscious pretty quickly, and also symbolically coherent as to be able to interpret reality in more depth. Being like that, you pick up on other people's emotional and mental materials more quickly, sometimes on collective currents as well. That's a really difficult thing to learn to discern and not take personally. But no one teaches you how to deal with this or how to let it go because there's no magical hygiene class in school. So people are very finely tuned sometimes from day one, and some gain attunement throughout life. Some never try because they think that it does not exist, and why would you try something that doesn't exist? Some are very afraid of it because the typical idea of it goes against the rules that they've been taught throughout life, their core belief system, actually. And of course, there are many ways that you can get it very, very badly wrong. So the people that stay away from it are not entirely wrong. Also, there are people that have a great gift of attunement and perception because it is truly about being able to perceive on many levels at the same time. It is about presence in the moment because you're not able to perceive anything unless you're in the moment completely and fully, which is where the word real as part of this phrase comes in. Being immersed in everything that's going on at the same time and trying to figure out the melody. This could be a lot of noise to take in and is very difficult to endure for long periods of time. So very gifted people give up early on feeling all those vibes and switch them off on purpose. And if you switch off something on purpose, then you need to remember to switch it on again when you need it. And a lot of times people forget to do this. Now, regarding my experience of the magical real, I would be talking about it throughout every single show because that is primarily the reason I wanted to start making a podcast like this, in order to share things. And there's quite a lot to share because I really don't remember my life without it. So it probably started when I started. But I did have an ambivalence towards revealing the experiences I had, except with people that had a similar life path. And I waited for quite a long time to share things publicly. And the reason is that the timing was wrong. I think I had to go through a great deal of life experience, as well as educating myself within a scientific framework, to be absolutely sure that what I'm saying is coming from a place of, not of certainty, but of absolute authenticity. And that it would be helpful to offer my views to connect to a wider network of people with similar experiences, because a great chunk of the public sphere, and in particularly mainstream psychology, are still mostly dismissive of all that would be described as supernatural or psi experiences of a nature that cannot be described within the current scientific discourse. So a good portion of human existence is unavailable for psychological research, other than within the few avenues of investigation, that is transpersonal or archetypal psychology, and certain integrative approaches. Recently, the psychology of anomalous, exceptional, and non-ordinary experiences became a new term for what used to be called parapsychology. With that, attitudes are changing, which is very good news for people that consider such states a part of their everyday lives. It's hard to conduct scientific research when a good percentage of your peers does not believe that what you study even exists, palpably, other than as a symptom of psychological disorder. It is essential, therefore, to depathologize these experiences in order for them to be accepted as an inherent part of the human condition. They're actually very ordinary. They're common to so many people and part of so many traditions, so many storylines, that it's almost appalling how much they're excluded from the mainstream. And indeed, while I was studying psychology, and I studied at the University of Novi Sad, that was in the 90s, it was extraordinary how many people were visiting astrologers, psychics, healers, or having psi experiences, precognitive dreams, but at the same time being extremely quiet about it in terms of talking about it in class, because it also served as a sort of diagnosis. And this is simply not the case, because if an experience exists separate to a cluster of symptoms, then it needs to be examined in that kind of way. And I think that's a very scary prospect for the sciences as it crosses over to the other side, removing the bulwark towards what Freud, when he was chastising Jung on Jung's alchemical leanings, that led him astray from the dogma of the centrality of sexuality, what Freud called the black tide of mud of occultism. Now, it's a necessary step to take, and it's a pretty interesting thing to note that this decision of Freud's was not because he dismissed the phenomena at all. He was very much interested in the phenomena. Any Google search can tell you that. But Sigmund Freud was very pragmatic, and all this stuff was too close to home, the backbone of a fair chunk of psychological theory. If you scratch enough off the surface, you will find it everywhere, in a very obscure kind of way, but very present. It's a predecessor to psychology, so to speak. It was always going to be competition, and it still is competition. Establishing a new science required a full renunciation of superstitious old ways. That was, at the time, a smart thing to do. In the long run, not so much. What is curious, though, is that if we look at arts and the entertainment industries, particularly film, we'll see that the supernatural and everything connected to the mythical is absolutely embraced. And increasingly so, it is embraced to the point that it overwhelms our senses, it overwhelms our narratives. The only actual blockbusters are the fantasy and superhero films. Harry Potter has been a phenomenon that cannot be measured with any other in publishing. The magical was always part of storytelling, an essential part of storytelling, in fact. But today, because of the possibility of disseminating information and stories globally within seconds, it is really weird just how much it is a part of the conversation and not part of examination. Enchantment became the leading counter-narrative to the grimness of the political landscape and the looming individual and collective economic breakdown on a massive scale. And this is really strange, right? So, although the fields of sociology and anthropology in particular have been very good at examining this trend, or rather very active at it, it's just two branches of social sciences. There's a whole interdisciplinary tree missing. And a big part of it is the lack of research into anything to do with psi phenomena in psychology, other than as a part of a dubious but well-funded military purpose, which we don't know much about, but we hear every so often. Or a much less well-funded lab experiment, or experiments at colleges, which in itself is a very simplistic approach. Because anybody who is aware they have psi abilities can tell you that in order to activate them, you need to be in situ. You really need to be within a situation in order to assess it and access it, even when it is occurring in the imaginal realm. And laboratory can never provide the exact sensory situational conditions that are necessary to initiate a clear vision. It is an extremely difficult and not to say somewhat psychologically aggressive thing to do. For myself, I can say that it's a very easy thing for me to pick up on things in the flow of life, with or without a divination tool. But I'm really rubbish at Zener cards used for ESP testing because, who cares about empty shapes? What divining or remote viewing or telepathy or lucid dreaming is about is meaning. You ride on the meaning of things. That's why you spot them. This is why this whole approach of trying to isolate it in a laboratory and experimental conditions always fails in the long run. And this is a good example of where the real difference between magic as it flows and an occult interference and subversion of that natural current comes into play. The gist is, you mostly surf the wave. You seldom shape it. And of course, the approach to the magical is entirely different in arts and humanities. There is intellectual freedom to be open to unorthodox possibilities, but still keep your scholarly hat on. And I think one of the reasons I went to study film theory rather than filmmaking, which was the plan, is that I needed a reference point, some sort of academic detachment towards what I would be creating anyway. I really did not have that sort of rationalization then. I just went for it because that's where I was at the time. But it took me out of my own art bubble and made me think of art as applied to society. Before I even realized I was thinking conceptually. And I was thinking on how curatorial and the artistic merge at certain points of time and appear to work as one. In a perverse kind of way, ideology relies on this transference. This is why it is also a high point of danger in politics. So I was studying at Birkbeck. It was an MA course that was in the mid-noughties. And at the time, I really had this incredible inner pressure to say something about the civil war in Yugoslavia, which is where I come from, and which ended with the NATO bombing of Serbia and Montenegro in 1999. It marked the population, of course, irreversibly. My generation especially, as we came of age when it all started. It messed up our lives entirely. And I had a deep need to challenge the established media narrative on that whole decade, on all sides actually, at least in a small way. It was both an artistic and a moral impulse. And it turned out that I did manage to address it, or maybe even shift the narrative a tiny, tiny bit, at least for a few people, somehow. And the way to do this was not through this odd cryptic short film I shot in a shelter in '96 called The Shelter, but through the chance of curating the film season. And that was at the ICA in London, the Institute of Contemporary Art. And I called the season No Exit, and that was via my studies. So bringing in the films that showed a civilian story that was not seen in the mainstream news, that really, really got me thinking of what I, up to that point, viewed as a clear demarcation point between being an artist and being in programming, and especially the marketing professions. Art is mercurial, not only Venusian in nature, and this is how it finds its way. This got me thinking in a philosophical way about what I am doing creatively. It gave me the concept I needed, and I would have not gone that way if I was following my strict professional plan. The way I understood it throughout my life experience and the knowledge of the mystical is that reality is what we co-create. There is an element of fate, there is an element of free choice, there are moments of inspiration, there are also moments of conjuration, and then there are the dark alleys where you only count on your angels to help you. And what connects everything is a glue that we can only sense through our hearts, because it is sculpting life. And how do you define sculpting life? It's same as defining love. There is no definition. Throughout my life, there has been a good number of extraordinary healers, alternative therapies I went to, divinatory practices, shamanic methods that I had the opportunity to access and some to study. I have learned most on how to drive the shaping of my own life force safely in the last 8 years in education as integrative art psychotherapist. This is where I also went through therapy. I've had the space to slowly apply stuff, primarily in my creative and theoretical work, but also, predictably enough, working in the film industry. So I went on to promote films for Picture House Cinemas in London. That was for 5 years in total. And I did a lot of audience-facing media work. While I was working in a very commercial capacity, I was also given the space to develop an understanding of spectatorship in situ and the impact of film on our psyches. And one of the most interesting aspects for me was the less glamorous project, because there are some very, very glamorous ones like Sundance London. But this smaller project, I think, had a very high conceptual and cultural value. It was after screening talks in our documentary program. And it was definitely a free-form version of art therapy. Really powerful stuff in there to get to know on how people think, what they're really interested in, what moves them. You cannot figure that out well on social media, and certainly not through questionnaires, because people are more likely to be authentic in real time. And there is no time lag in live conversations. Immediate interaction is necessary, and it's also the key to getting to know people. Real emotions and thoughts, not the show. So to wrap up this now quite prolonged intro, I'd like to mention also that the guests we will have on will be people that live their lives in a magical way. Now, that is definitely something that would be my subjective opinion, and of course their own choice if they want to come to the show or not, if they think of themselves in that way. I think that living your life in a magical way requires courage, intention, and endurance. And it's never easy. The sabotages you face are both internal and external. But the rewards are ones of the heart, mind, and soul. It's a beautiful life to lead, and it never lets you down. There is wisdom everywhere. but the decision is yours, whether to take it on or not. You don't choose to have a gift, but you choose if you will use it or not. And because it is at the same time an enormous treasure and a great burden, negotiating it through life becomes a mission in itself. That's it, in a nutshell, of what I hope Lola and the Poets podcast becomes. But hopefully it will be about much else. And because when you set limits to a certain labor of love, if you don't surpass those limits and continue on, you're not doing a good job. And I hope to be doing a good job for you and for me, and I'll make it fun. I will endeavor to have an episode out every odd Thursday, which just means that I will drop it when there's something to say or a guest to talk to. But the day of the week will always be the same. We need to have some regularity. So Thursdays will be our days. I hope to have the upcoming shows jotted down for you on my main podcast page at least a few days in advance. Now, downloads are not yet available, but they will be soon. Please follow my Poets, Mavericks and Prophets blog for notifications, or subscribe to my YouTube channel if it is your preferred way. You can find me at a lot of places online. The Poets, Mavericks and Prophets blog for poetry, philosophy and psychology, and another blog for film reviews and filmology called Lola on Film. All these links will be in the show notes. There is an Instagram account and a Twitter account, and also my personal Facebook page, which is mostly for friends and people I know professionally, but lots of posts are public too, if you would like to follow. The next show will be out on Thursday, the 12th of December, and my guest will be Milica Mijatovic. She is my lovely cousin and a traveler extraordinaire, and she's on the road around the globe for the last 6 years. We'll be talking about her incredible life, her planetary adventures, and navigating the tides of fortune. That would be all for this time, folks. Stay in the sacred, especially if you're walking in the dark. Be your own secret society, always. And good luck.